Hello, I'm Lauren Huberman.
And I'm Christina McLean. Welcome to All Access. We were fortunate enough to talk to Jennifer Keelan-Chaffins in this month's episode to celebrate the 34th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act that was passed into law on July 26, 1990.
Jennifer Keelan-Chaffins is a passionate advocate for the support and implementation of the Americans with Disabilities Act and an activist for disability rights. She joined the disability rights movement at age 6, and at age 8, she participated in the famous Capitol Crawl protest to support the passage of the ADA. The Capitol Crawl was a protest in which dozens of individuals abandoned their mobility aids and crawled up the steps of the U.S. Capitol to demonstrate the lack of physical access they faced. Jennifer describes this protest as a visual demonstration to show Congress what it was like for people with disabilities when confronted with barriers. Jennifer is an educator and a motivational speaker. She teaches audiences about the importance of the ADA, the Capitol Crawl, and the disability rights movement, and its place in American history, with an emphasis on education, advocacy, and empowerment. And one note, you will hear Jennifer talking to her mom, Cynthia, during the conversation.
We found this conversation to be very powerful, and we hope that you do too. So thanks for being with us, Jennifer. We're really excited to have this conversation with you, especially in honor of the ADA's 34th birthday on July 26th. We know that you started as an activist at a very young age. You were 6, from what we've read. Would love to learn how you would describe what an activist is and where and how you got started doing that work at such a young age.
Sure. It's very nice to be here to talk with you. So I joined the disability rights movement and started participating in the disability rights movement at age 6. That was when I attended my very first protest in Phoenix, Arizona, to protest the lack of wheelchair accessible buses. And my very first protest was a very cool, awesome experience because this was the first time that I saw adults with disabilities fighting for their civil rights and the right to be treated like everyone else and the right to have full and equal access to all areas of society and public life. And as a child, I thought that this was really, really cool because, even though I was young, both my sister and I had already had experience of discrimination. And so we realized at a very young age what discrimination was. And we wanted to use our voices to change that. And when we met all of these adults who were fighting for their civil rights and the right to be treated like everyone else and the right to, have the same access as everybody else, both my sister and I were like, aha, this is how we can do it. It was a very, very empowering experience. Because at that point, Keely and I realized that we did not have to accept the discrimination that we were experiencing as young children. Being denied access to going to the same school or going to the same daycare or, having the ability to just do normal things like go to the mall or go to the movie theater or even go to a restaurant, without being denied access because the waiter or waitress refused to serve us because they told us that my wheelchair was a fire hazard. These were things that Kaylee and I had already experienced as young children. And when we saw these adults, fighting for their civil rights, we were like, this is how we can do it. This is what we can do to contribute to this awesome movement for positive change and for civil rights for people with disabilities so that we all can be treated the same way as everybody else and be recognized as full citizens. And so that was a very empowering moment for both my sister and I.
So we know that when you were 8, you were part of a very big protest. But before we get to that, can you talk to us a little bit about what you did? Were you involved in numerous protests before 1990 in those 2 years leading up to the passage of the ADA?
Yeah. So by the time I did the Capitol crawl, I had already been protesting for 2 years. So I was a pro, especially doing media interviews by the time I did the Capitol crawl. We did how many cities did we do?
Let's see. St. Louis. San Francisco was number 2, the second protest where you met Judy Heumann
And Justin.
Justin Dart, your teachers and mentors. Let's see who else. Montreal, Reno, Washington, D.C. We probably did at least five
times.
Oh, Atlanta. My gosh. And Atlanta was really important because that was when President Bush intervened and basically said we all had the right to protest. And yes, you can voice your opinion too.
That is just a partial list.
In DC, of course, the most memorable of all the protests, and San Francisco.
It is well known that, the most famous and well-known protest that I attended and participated in was the Capitol Crawl. I actually did a lot of protest and advocacy work way, way, way before that. By the time I did the Capitol Crawl, I had already been protesting for 2 years and attended many. So
yeah, wow, that was a lot. That was a long list.
Yeah.
Can you, for our listeners, talk about the Capitol Crawl or kind of explain what that is and your role in it?
So the Capitol Crawl is a very, very important protest because it was a visual demonstration to show Congress what it was like for people with disabilities when we were being confronted with barriers. Because keep in mind, Congress was stalling the full passage of the ADA. We had the full support of the Senate. And as a matter of fact, the Senate had passed their version of the ADA in September of 1989. So the Senate version of the Americans with Disabilities Act is actually known as the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1989, because that's when the Senate passed it. But overall, Congress was still stalling its full passage. And so we were like, well, what can we do to show Congress why it's important to pass the ADA without any further delay or weakening amendments? Because that was the other thing that they were trying to do. They were trying to weaken the amendments of the ADA, and we didn't want that. We wanted the ADA passed as it is, fully, without any further delay or any weakening amendments. So we were like, so what can we do? And we were like, well, let's show them. Let's show them what it's like when people with disabilities are confronted with barriers. And so that's what the Capitol Crawl represents. It was a visual demonstration for Congress to literally show them what it was like for people with disabilities when we were being confronted with barriers. And if I could back up just a little bit, the other thing that's really important about the Capitol Crawl is there was another very important piece attached to that, and that was the Wheels of Justice March. And the Wheels of Justice March was the march from the White House to the Capitol. And then after that, we had the rally, and then we had the Capitol Crawl. And my participation was very important because I realized that as a young child, I was not there just representing myself, but I was there representing my generation and future generations of kids with disabilities. So that's why I felt so strongly, even at age 8, that I needed to participate, that someone from my generation needed to be there to represent not only my generation, but future generations of kids with disabilities. So that's why I was so determined to participate no matter what. And to be honest with you, there were some adults that didn't want me to do the crawl. And it was for two reasons. One, they thought it would be too difficult for me because I was a child. And two, they thought that it would send a message of pity rather than empowerment and, send the message that people with disabilities were childlike. But I was determined to show them and tell them why it was important for someone of, my generation to do it. And I knew that it wasn't just about my experiences, but it was also about all the other kids with disabilities experiences as well. And as someone, as a child who got to be so closely involved in this movement, I felt deeply that I had a responsibility not just to represent myself, but to represent everyone as well.
Just for people who might not know like what the Capitol crawl was, like how did that get decided on that what you were going to do, like what the group was going to do?
So we all made the decision the night before to do the Capitol crawl. And I knew at that point that I wanted to participate no matter what. And so, as a matter of fact, I was so excited to do the Capitol crawl that I purposely left my AFO leg braces at the motel room so that it would be easier for me to crawl up the steps. On that day, I remember being told by some of the adults that they wanted me to sit it out, that, they didn't want me to participate. And it was actually Wade Blank, the co-founder of ADAPT, who came to me and said, Jennifer, why are you crying? Tell me why you're crying and why this is so important to you. And I told him why it was important for me to do it, not only for myself, but for all the other kids. He turned to me and he said, well, then you do what's in your heart. And then he turned to my mom and grabbed my mom by the hand and said, don't look back. Don't look back, Mom. Don't look back. And my mom looks back and I'm halfway up the steps and here's this big roar cheering me on. And yeah, it was a very, very empowering and powerful moment that day. Mm-hmm. And believe it or not, it was really, really hot that day, like 80 degrees. And everybody will tell you that it was super, super hot that day. And what I remember the most, besides all of the cameras that were all watching us do the climb, was every time I asked for water, I had 50 cups of water at my disposal. All of us that did the crawl, we all had attendants assigned to us that day. And so that young man that you see in the Adapt shirt and jeans with the styrofoam cup, he was my attendant for the day. And he was the one that was handing me water every time I asked for it.
Wow, that's incredible. After that day, did you feel a lot of pressure and did things start to change for you just in terms of your role as an advocate and your recognition that people might have given you?
Well, I am super, super proud of that very important day in our history. I'm very, very proud to have been a part of that. One of the things that happened afterwards was the fact that, prior to that, the media was ignoring the importance of, the ADA and, why we needed the ADA passed. And that day when we did the Capitol crawl, it not only got all of the media's attention and it got national media's attention, it also got international media's attention as to why, this was important. I'm very, very proud to have been a part of that and to have, created that change. Mm-hmm. And as far as being, told that, all of the attention was on me, I was just one participant that day. And, there were a lot of other people around me, and we all did it together. So it wasn't just about me and my participation, it was about all of us. And that's another thing that was a really, really cool thing about that day was the fact that we all came together all of the disability rights groups came together. I mean, everybody was represented. We had Federation for the Blind, we had Gallaudet, we had paralyzed veterans. Everybody came together and we all spoke with one voice, and we all were determined to tell Congress why it was important to pass the ADA. And it just goes to show you what we can do together and how powerful we are as a community when we work together. Because I always say that change occurs when we speak up and speak out together. We are a powerful community when we support each other and we speak out together. And the Capitol Crawl and the passage of the ADA and the Wheels of Justice March is just proof of that. It's proof of what happens when we, as Lawrence Carter Long says, roll together, sit together, stand together in solidarity.
Yeah, that's a great message and something too, that we all should think about and remember how powerful that is, that shared voice. So we know that in July 26, 1990, President George H.W. Bush signed the passage of the ADA. It's probably unlikely that you saw changes right away. Do you remember like when you started to really recognize the impact of the ADA's passage?
Well, I actually started seeing, changes starting in 1991. That's when I started seeing more ramps and curb cuts and, physical accessibility changes starting to be put into place. One of the things that affected me personally was the fact that I won the right to go to my neighborhood school. Back in 1990 to 1991, Roy Romer at that time was debating on signing the School of Choice bill, but at that time he excluded kids with disabilities. And I wanted to go to my neighborhood school, which was Forest Elementary. It was the school that I could literally see from my front yard. As my book says, that was it. That was my neighborhood school. And both Kaylee and I wanted to go together. Had Romer signed the School of Choice bill at that time, I would have been excluded and denied the right to go to my neighborhood school, which by then the ADA was in place for a year. And I reminded Governor Romer that if he signed the School of Choice bill and purposely excluded kids with disabilities, it would be discriminatory and against the ADA, which was our new civil rights law at that time. And I remember I went to his office with 50 of my disabled friends at that time and literally did a little mini protest at his office telling him why excluding kids with disabilities was discriminatory and violated the ADA. Needless to say, he did not sign the bill. And so the following year in 1991, I was able to go to my neighborhood school, which was Forest Elementary. One of the very first lessons that I learned from my teachers and mentors and being part of the disability rights movement is separate is not equal. Brown versus the Board of Education of 1954. That was my very, very first lesson that I learned from my teachers and mentors. As a matter of fact, whenever Kaylee and I were interviewed by the media, they would always say, do you know why you're here? Do you know what's going on? And Kaylee and I would go, of course we do. We want to ride the bus together and have the same access as everyone else. Kaylee she would put her hand on her hip and she'd go, separate is not equal. It's all about the Browns and the education. Keep in mind, she was 4. And the media would go, wait, what? It's all about the Browns and the education. And they would say, oh, you mean Brown versus the Board of Education? And she'd say, that's right. Separate is never equal. And so, those were the very very first lessons that my sister and I were taught. And the fact of the matter is that is the premise of the ADA. Separate is not equal. First and foremost, we have to remember that the ADA is a civil rights law, and it demands that people with disabilities have the same access and the same civil rights as every other American citizen. Because keep in mind, prior to the ADA, it was legal to discriminate. It was legal to deny someone access to a restaurant. It was legal to deny them, access to a movie theater. It was legal to deny them, normal everyday access that everybody else had. And so, this is why the ADA is so much more than even what people know about it. And why it's important that we continue to use our voices to create positive change for full and equal access under the ADA, because our work is not done. Clearly, our work is not done. And this is why it's important that we continue.
Yeah, I mean, we could just kind of go off, what you were just talking about, and that, we know that our work is not done, as that's a huge part of why our office exists at the mayor's office for people with disabilities, as we continue to try to make Chicago the most inclusive and accessible city in the world. What are some areas that you think still need advancement?
Well, I think that a part of the work that we still need to do is we still need to advance employment. We still have work to do in housing, clearly. We still have work to do in creating situations where we can update outdated policies that still promote discrimination, both with physical barriers and as well as attitudinal barriers. We still have things that we still need to do, like update outdated policies like SSI. For example, people with disabilities are still the most impoverished population in the United States and elsewhere, because we still are dealing with outdated policies that promote discrimination and poverty. These are things that we still need to change. This is part of the work that we still need to do. And how do we do that? We do that by continuing to speak up and speak out, and continuing to support each other, and continuing to create positive change so that the ADA and all disability rights laws can be to their fullest potential and fullest extent.
Absolutely. I know that you mentioned employment. We'd love to hear what you do now. I know you do some training and some education series for youth.
Yes. So what I do is I'm a motivational speaker, and I teach audiences, including young children and in schools, about the importance of the ADA, the Capitol Crawl, and its important part of our history, with an emphasis on education, advocacy, and empowerment. And I believe that this is part of the work that we still need to do, because, this is a very important part of our history that is rarely taught and discussed in the classroom. And I want to change that, because disability rights are a part of civil rights history. And this is a part of America's history. And I think that part of what we need to do to empower the next generation is to teach them this very important part of our history, so that they will be able to have the tools that they need to enforce their rights, or the rights of their friends and family members under the ADA. And so this is why I feel that it's very important. And as leaders, I feel that very strongly that it's our duty to pass this on to the next generation.
That's awesome. What are some takeaways or some principles that you like people to come away with? What kinds of things do you want them to learn? What kinds of tools do you want them to walk away with? And maybe that applies to their rights as an individual with a disability, or maybe that applies to another type of movement or civil right.
So when it comes to the ADA, and this is something that I tell everyone, especially when I'm doing my presentations, I believe that there are two parts to the ADA, and they're very, very important. One is the black and white civil rights aspect of the law, and the other part is the personal empowerment piece of the ADA. The personal empowerment piece of the ADA is, what does the ADA mean to you? How does that allow you to enforce and exercise your rights under the ADA? Because what makes the ADA so important is the fact that how it empowers you to use your voice to exercise your rights under the ADA. The ADA is our tool. It is our tool to exercise our civil rights as American citizens and fully recognized as American citizens. But we are the ones that give it its power. It is our voices that give it its power. It is our voices that say, this is my civil right. Access is my civil right. Accommodations are my civil right. Employment is my civil right. Housing is my civil right. Full and equal access is my civil right. And so how does that empower you to use your voice? Those two parts together, the personal empowerment piece of the ADA and the black and white piece of the ADA. The personal empowerment piece of the ADA is the spirit and intent. The black and white is the law itself. And it's when those two pieces come together that we are able to fully utilize the ADA and fully exercise our rights. And that's something that I have come across. A lot of people know about the black and white part of the law. They know about the employment piece. They know about the law itself, but they don't know necessarily the history behind it, and they don't know necessarily how to apply it. That's, I think, where some of that frustration comes from. But I'm here to tell you that when it comes to the ADA, it is our tool, and it's our voices, our willingness to, if we have to, file complaints when our rights are violated, saying, no, I'm not going to accept this discrimination that I'm experiencing. That's illegal, that's discriminatory. And it's when we use our voices to say, no, I'm not going to accept this discrimination and I'm going to fight back. That's where the power of the ADA comes from. It comes from our voices and our ability to stand up for our rights.
Again, a really important message, and something that I don't know if a lot of people think about, the ADA in that way. So thank you. One thing we like to ask all our guests is, what would you tell, and I'm sure you tell them all the time in your motivational speeches, but other people or even children who are interested in advocacy or, activist work, what would you tell them to do?
Well, the first thing that I always tell kids is that if you see something in your community that needs to change, especially when it's due to a lack of accessibility, then the first thing that I would do is talk to your city and state leaders, your city mayors, your state governors, and all of your city and state leaders, because sometimes they're not aware of a problem until you bring it to their attention. Even if you see something that needs to change in your school, well, then talk to your teachers, your principals, your superintendents. Tell them, what the problem is and why it needs to change. and tell them why the ADA is important to you and why we need to continue to recognize, enforce, and defend the ADA as a civil rights law. Because a lot of times people aren't aware that there's a problem, especially at the community level, until you bring it to their attention.
Jennifer, I have to think that your mom has been a big influence on you, in addition to your teachers and your mentors. But, when you're a young child, it's not like inherent. You don't just know about activism and protests. Like, I would imagine that your mom has really been a huge influence on you.
She has.
Yeah.
And not just my mom, but my grandfather and all of my family. They were my very first teachers.
I think you've left us with a lot to think about and a lot to continue to work towards. But I just wanted to thank you for your advocacy and all the work that you've done, to help people with disabilities live more inclusive and accessible lives.
Well, thank you.
Well, this has been really incredible, Jennifer, and I feel like I've learned a lot even in this short time with you today, as well as, when I had an opportunity to talk with you and your mom. It's been really meaningful, and, I think there's really big takeaways. And I know that you'll continue to advocate and educate. And, that's something that we seek to do at the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities as well. But you have certainly been a fierce, fierce advocate and leader. And it's been really, really meaningful to talk to you. Thank you for joining us for this month's episode of All Access. Be sure to check us out on social media at MOPD Chicago.
Special thanks to our executive producer, Commissioner Rachel Arfa, the City of Chicago's production team, our sign language interpreters who helped to make our podcast accessible, and our special guest today. See you next time.